What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Pack-A-Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. Want to start things off today by making a plea to Brian Gutekunst to please do something over the course of the next week so that we've got something a little bit more to talk about. I think everyone's a little bit mock draft out, and I think everyone just wants like maybe a small crumb of like a free agent that we can break down or something that we can do. Just for me personally, as somebody trying to record, an episode every single day, give me a little bit something to work with here. I'd appreciate it greatly. But in the meantime, going to do my best to continue to come up with content for you guys every single day. I got a couple topics that I want to go over today. And the first one of those topics is going to be the virtual offseason program, at least for the next 4 weeks from the Packers. And I think this was a really smart move as we started to see players come out from different teams saying that they've decided as a group of players that they are not going to attend off-season workouts or OTAs until the league and the Players Association come to an agreement on correct protocols and everything like that. And it just isn't a great look. It's not great optics. And in the meantime, I just think Green Bay came to this wonderful conclusion. And remember, things are a degree of different in Green Bay where they give a ton of off-season roster bonuses to attend these sort of things because they know that generally players don't want to stick around Green Bay in the offseason, so they put a ton of incentives in contracts in order to show up to these things so that they can get full participation and make sure that everyone's attending and that they can kind of keep the team collectively together during the offseason program. So a lot of bonuses for these players, and if Green Bay doesn't do something and those players don't show up, now they've got to figure out that whole mess. Players might not be happy. If players are showing up and they're forced to do so because of their bonuses, they're not forced to, but in order to make the money that they were expecting to make, they have to do it at a time where maybe they don't feel the most comfortable and they probably are feeling like maybe they're stepping on some of the Players Association's toes or their teammates' toes who are not as comfortable with attending OTAs. It just gets really messy really quick. And I get people may fall in different sides of that argument. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. But I think more importantly, it was just wise for Green Bay to make the decision that they did. And I talked to Aaron Nagler about this earlier this week on Let's Talk Packers on Cheesehead TV. And, we kind of talked about this in a little bit more detail. And I think the thing here that's so important to remember is that Matt LaFleur has been insanely ahead of the curve with virtual learning and unique ways to teach players even before he needed to when this entire COVID situation hit. And I thought Green Bay was once again ahead of the curve in how they were training their players this past offseason and some of the stuff they did on the Zoom calls, trying to keep things creative. It got a lot of great feedback from the players. We saw the results on the field. And even when they took days off when they needed to because there were things that were going on that were bigger in the world than practicing for football, you could tell it was something that the players appreciated. It was something that the team learned from, that united them together. And I just think overall, Matt LaFleur and this Packers organization and front office has kept a really great pulse on the status of their team, where their players are at, what they need to do to motivate these guys, keep them happy, but still going through the process that they need to go through in order to be successful in the NFL. And if there's any team, in my opinion, I'm not just saying this as a Packer fan, if there's any team that can pull off this virtual type of offseason again, to me, it's the Green Bay Packers. And Matt LaFleur, I think just being a little bit of a younger coach and understanding how to get through to some of these players that frankly aren't that much younger than he is, I just think Green Bay has a huge leg up in that situation. And again, we saw the results a season ago. So kudos to Green Bay for, I think, making the right decision. They didn't have to have their players come out and say they weren't going to show up or go through these lengthy issues where players weren't getting the money because they didn't show up. This just makes great sense from all the way around. And hopefully within these next 4 weeks, the teams and the players associations and the owners and the NFL will be able to come to an agreement on what this offseason will look like. I know a lot of Packer fans, myself included, are hoping there are training camps, obviously within a safe environment, and once people are hopefully vaccinated and ready to do so. But hopefully we're able to get there and we can have a normal training camp and preseason and season with fans in the stands back at Lambeau, tailgating, brats and beer and the whole 9 yards and old fashions at Banky's house. We need to make sure all of this is happening. So would love to see it, but I think Green Bay made a really smart and wise move. And again, I don't think any team is better set up for success than the Packers in doing so over the course of the next 4 weeks. One other quick topic that I wanted to go over today is kind of this idea that Dane Brugler came out with through The Athletic. And he was specifically talking about the Colts and how they trade back for draft picks so often and how they're very successful in doing so. First of all, a lot of people believe that the Colts will trade back from pick 21. So if you're looking for a trade partner from 29 to 21 or up earlier in the draft for Green Bay, the Colts love trading back. So keep an eye out as that for a potential deal when pick 21's on the board. It will likely be a trade with Indianapolis. It seems to be leaning that way. And if Chris Ballard and Brian Gutekunst can get together and figure out a deal that makes sense for both sides, maybe a Greg Newsome, someone like that is on the board. Don't be surprised if it's Brian Gutekunst that comes calling. We've seen Green Bay be aggressive in trading up. We've seen Chris Ballard liking to trade back. Those two could make very smart partners in the first round of the draft. But back to my main point here, Dane Brugler was mentioning, and I'll just read it to you verbatim, and he's talking about the Colts here. I wouldn't even be surprised if they trade to get picks for next year. You trade a 4th rounder this year for a 3rd rounder next year. That's what smart teams are going to do when they will know more information about these prospects next spring after a more normal college football season and scouting season. With more info, you're taking smarter swings. And this makes a lot of sense, right? This, very much like last year, is a draft where there's less games on these prospects, there's less tape, there was less opportunity to go see them in person, there was no NFL scouting combine. Everything was like 10 degrees off of normal for this specific draft class. Some of them didn't even get to normal games. Some of them sat out the entirety of last season. So the point being here is that these draft picks are probably a little bit more of a crapshoot than even in a normal draft. And the expectation is that there will be a normal college football season next year, a normal scouting combine, and that next year's draft will actually give you a better opportunity to evaluate these players and make smarter decisions with the draft picks you have. So if some team is willing to trade, say, a 3rd rounder next year for one of your 4th rounders this year, or a 2nd for a 3rd, or a 1st for a 2nd, any of those, which are deals we've seen happen in the past, that smart teams will take advantage of that and take the pick next year so that they can, get better swings at these players with more information, more knowledge, etc. And my point being here is, if Green Bay is smart here, I think they reverse engineer this and take advantage of it the other way. I think this this draft sets up really, really well for Green Bay. And I think the positions that are specific needs to them, both short-term and long-term, are positions that are very deep in this draft, specifically offensive line and cornerback. I also think wide receiver goes pretty deep in this draft as well. And Green Bay has a scouting department that's made up of true scouts and people that I think are going to base more of their evaluation off of tape and what they know about these players than maybe, some of these, organizations that are more analytics based or look for, Green Bay has that analytics process, and I've gone over that already. But I think this is a front office made up of former scouts who have done the tape work and know how to evaluate and grade players. I think Green Bay sets up well for success in that type of environment, and I think this draft sets up well. Now, let's not kid ourselves here, right? We know that Brian Gutekunst is not the style of GM that's all of a sudden going to say, hey, I'm going to trade my next year's 1st and 2nd round picks to get up and do a bunch of stuff in this year's draft. That's not how he operates, nor is should that be how he operates, period. That's not good strategy. You would rather have that full time to evaluate, and there's just no need to do that. However, again, I mentioned already that the positions that Green Bay needs short and long term are in this draft. I actually really like this draft. I actually think it's a really good top 100 draft class filled with really strong prospects. And I also think that Green Bay is in a position that they could get players now that could help them. And I know they haven't had the most success with finding players that can help them right away. But I think they need some of that competition at some of those core spots, defensive line. And that's one position that's not as deep. I should mention that. But defensive line, cornerback, wide receiver, interior offensive line, offensive tackle. These are all spots that could use that influx of talent sooner rather than later. And with the moves that Green Bay made to kind of go sort of all in this season, using maybe a couple draft picks from next year to move up this year or maybe gain an extra pick this year, I actually think can make some really good sense for Green Bay. Now, how does that work in practice? I think if Green Bay is looking to move up, let's say with an Indianapolis, let's say normally they could get there with their two fourth-round picks from this year. My thought would be, give them a call and say, hey, can we give our third and fourth next year rather than our 2 fourths this year to move up, or maybe just a fourth this year and a fourth next year, or something in that regard, or maybe a fifth this year and a third next year, and maybe give up that pick instead and be able to keep your top fourth round and above picks in this draft where you think you can get the talent that's going to help you both now and into the future. I think that could actually be a strategy that works for Green Bay and maybe gets Indianapolis those picks that they want next year and allows Green Bay to still attack the draft very aggressively and find some players, hopefully, that are going to be able to contribute in what they're hoping is going to be a Super Bowl winning season in 2021. Thanks so much for joining me today. As always, make sure to check out Alex, Russ, and Owen on today's audio version of the podcast, episode 1001. I'll be right back here tomorrow. Please make sure to subscribe and like if you have not already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.